Hey friends, it's Jimmy here with a quick reminder to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell and turn on all those notifications. Also, don't forget to leave a quick comment saying where you're listening from, since this really helps me out in the algorithm and assures the history content just keeps on coming. Anyway, with that said, sit back and enjoy this compilation of 4 episodes from earlier this year while me and the team work on new content. As thunder rolled over the waves of Lake Michigan in September 1679, a pioneering ship named Le Griffon vanished into history. This was no ordinary vessel. It was the first full-sized sailing ship ever to ply the upper Great Lakes, built by the ambitious French explorer René Robert Cavelier, Sieur de La Salle. Loaded with valuable furs and a crew of 6 for her return journey, Le Griffon set out from a remote island trading post with a favorable wind, only to disappear without a trace. In the blink of an eye, the Great Lakes' first great ship became its first great mystery. For more than 3 centuries since, historians, divers, and dreamers have wondered what happened to Le Griffon. After all, a 45-ton bark, armed with cannons, vanishing without a trace in the wilderness of the Great Lakes, is a highly unusual event. La Salle was a man with a plan, and in the late 1670s, this French explorer envisioned establishing a fur trade empire and finding a water route to China via the elusive Northwest Passage. To achieve these ambitious goals, he needed more than canoes. He needed a ship to navigate the Great Lakes and carry large cargoes of pelts and supplies. So, in 1679, deep in the Niagara wilderness above the falls, La Salle oversaw the construction of a 45-ton vessel he christened Le Griffon. And yeah, I'm going to let you take an educated guess as to what mythical creature he named the ship after. Built from local timber and fitted with 7 cannons, it was by far the largest ship the region had ever seen, astonishing the Native American tribes who watched this fortress take shape. La Salle launched Le Griffon on the upper Niagara River in the summer of 1679, marking the beginning of the end of the dominance of canoes in the Great Lakes. His ship, the first of its kind to sail beyond Niagara Falls, embarked with a crew of 32 men and a Jesuit priest, Father Louis Hennepin, aboard as chronicler. They traversed Lake Erie, navigated up the Detroit and St. Clair rivers into Lake Huron, and pressed onward into the uncharted waters of Lake Michigan. By the time Le Griffon reached the far end of Lake Michigan, it had proved that large vessels could operate in these waters, eventually paving the way for future ships and settlements in the region. La Salle's expedition reached its furthest point at a small island at the entrance of Green Bay on Lake Michigan in early September 1679. There, the French crew met with the Potawatomi people who had amassed a huge stockpile of pelts in anticipation of Le Griffon's arrival. La Salle decided to continue exploring inland, but he sent Le Griffon back east to deliver the valuable cargo. On September 18th, 1679, after riding out a gale for 4 days at anchor, the ship's pilot and 5 crew set sail from the island bound for the Niagara River. The ship was loaded down with an estimated 12,000 pounds of furs, an amount that was intended to pay off La Salle's massive debts. As La Salle watched her disappear over the horizon, he never imagined it would be the last time he saw his groundbreaking ship. Not long after leaving the sheltered harbor, Le Griffon sailed straight into a brewing storm over Lake Michigan. Local Potawatomi observers had warned the crew that a storm was coming and urged them not to depart. According to legend, the crew informed them that, quote, "A griffin does not fear the wind," a quote which was almost certainly added later for dramatic flair. Once out in open water, legend claims that the vessel met the full fury of the gale. Father Hennepin, the Jesuit priest, later wrote that the ship was tossed by violent winds and then simply vanished, possibly swallowed by the waves. However, he wasn't a personal witness to the event, and his source appears to be his own speculation combined with the accounts of native witnesses. These witnesses didn't actually see what happened to the ship, however, but rather, at best, they saw it leave in a storm. La Salle, waiting in vain for his ship's return, realized by late November that it was hopelessly overdue and likely lost. According to some accounts, he sent out a search party which found scraps of wreckage from a wooden ship. Given that his ship was the only old-world European-style sailing ship in that part of the Great Lakes ever, if this account is true, this confirmed his worst fears. The sudden disappearance of Le Griffon spawned countless theories. With no survivors to tell the tale, people filled the void with speculation. The most notable theory is that it simply sank in a storm, and there's some circumstantial evidence to support this. However, La Salle himself began to believe that something entirely different happened. La Salle grew convinced that his ship didn't sink by accident but was sabotaged. In a 1683 letter, he expressed his belief that the Griffin's pilot and crew might have intentionally scuttled the ship and ran off with the furs. According to this theory, the mutineers' plan unraveled when they were allegedly captured by native bands before they could get far. However, no concrete proof of a mutiny ever emerged, and La Salle himself would perish a few years later before the matter could be fully investigated. Another story claims that a band of warriors of the Ottawa tribe boarded the Griffin at anchor, eliminated the crew, looted the cargo, and burned the ship. This tale was recorded years later by a French missionary, but based on hearsay, and even he doubted its veracity. This missionary may have believed that the man who was telling him this story was trying to win French support against the Ottawa for secondary gain. That is to say, the French missionary thought that this individual was simply making the story up to further his own cause, or the cause of his tribe. No direct evidence has ever surfaced that any tribe attacked the ship, and no native oral histories have been connected to such an incident. Notably, if the incident did occur and these warriors were able to get their hands on 12,000 pounds of furs, this story would almost certainly have been repeated for generations. Despite these tales, no conclusive evidence has ever emerged to pinpoint Le Griffon's exact fate. The ship's end remains an open question, though most scholars still lean toward the storm on Lake Michigan as the most plausible culprit. The ship's elusive wreck has become legendary among shipwreck hunters. Since the 19th century, over 20 claims have surfaced from various corners of Lakes Michigan and Huron, each purporting to have found the long-lost vessel. Old timbers on a beach here, a mysterious hull there, yet each time, inspection proved it was another ship or lacked any definitive link to La Salle's ship. Searchers have continued to hunt for the ship up until the present day, though no site has ever been definitively linked to the wreck. It's easy to think of a sea monster as something sudden, a fleeting shape in a blurry photograph, a single terrifying breach of the waves, and then gone. But what happens when one comes to stay and set up a little cute home base in a bustling American harbor? That's exactly what happened in the summer of 1817 in Gloucester, Massachusetts, creating one of the most credible and intensely scrutinized sea monster stories in history. Long before the summer of 1817, whispers of a great serpent already haunted the rocky coast of Cape Ann. The earliest documented account comes from 1638, when the English traveler John Josselyn wrote of a creature seen by both English settlers and local indigenous people. They described a massive snake that coiled up upon the rocks on occasion. Crucially, Josselyn noted that the indigenous guides warned the Englishmen against shooting it, believing that if the beast weren't slain outright, it would attack and endanger all their lives. By 1817, Gloucester was one of America's oldest seaports, a town whose identity was forged on the waves of the North Atlantic. Its citizens were fishermen, mariners, and whalers, experts who could read the water like a book and identify its inhabitants at a glance. Their livelihoods depended on not being fooled by tricks of light or odd-looking waves. This context is what makes the story so compelling. When these men began reporting something they couldn't explain, it carried more weight than a usual tall tale. The first reports in early August 1817 were met with the expected ridicule. The skipper of a vessel reported seeing a 60-foot serpent at the harbor's entrance, an observation that was treated as a joke at the time. But the laughter didn't last long, and on August 10th, the woodpeckers of truth began to peck apart the dam of disbelief. Mariner Amos Story watched the creature from shore for over an hour, noting its head resembled a sea turtle. That same day, another resident saw what she thought was a log on an island, only to watch in shock as it moved on its own. The sightings intensified, and from August 12th to 14th, respected shipmaster Solomon Allen III observed the creature from his boat. He described a head as large as a horse's, a body with up to 50 distinct humps, and an incredible speed, estimating it could travel a mile in under 3 minutes. On August 14th, with crowds of curious onlookers lining the shore, the creature put on a show. The day's most dramatic encounter belonged to Matthew Gaffney, a ship carpenter who got within 30 feet of the animal. He described its head as the size of a keg, and its body as thick as a barrel, moving with a bizarre vertical motion. Gaffney did the natural thing and pulled out his musket and started blasting, but this seemed to have no effect, and the creature resurfaced a safe distance away. By mid-August, sea serpent mania had fully gripped the town. Sightings became a daily event, so common that some residents brought out chairs to watch the spectacle. Newspapers up and down the coast started spreading the tale far and wide. An arriving ship, unwarned of the harbor's new resident, reportedly saw the creature, turned, and fled in terror. The phenomenon didn't end with that summer, and the creature, or one just like it, returned in 1818 and again in 1819, with hundreds more witnessing it off a nearby coast. The sheer volume and duration of the sightings made it impossible to dismiss as a simple mistake. From the dozens of sworn testimonies, a remarkably consistent portrait of the creature emerged. Witnesses consistently placed its length between 60 and 100 feet, with a body as thick as a barrel. The head, often held several feet above the water, was compared to that of a horse, a sea turtle, or a large snake. It was described as dark and smooth, with no visible scales. But the creature's most defining characteristic was its body and motion. It was dark brown or black and appeared to be segmented, like a line of barrels floating in the water. This gave it a lumpy, jointed appearance, and this visual was directly linked to its unique method of propulsion. It moved in a vertical, undulating way that witnesses repeatedly likened to a caterpillar crawling. This detail is particularly significant, as known marine animals generally move with a horizontal side-to-side action. The consistent reporting of a completely different, almost unnatural form of movement suggests that the witnesses were observing a real and singular phenomenon. It moved with astonishing speed, far faster than a whale, but was also seen resting placidly on the surface, seemingly indifferent to the commotion it was causing. The news from Gloucester electrified Boston's intellectual elite, particularly the members of the fledgling Linnaean Society of New England. Formed in 1814, this ambitious group of doctors, lawyers, and other men of learning saw a golden opportunity. In a scientific world completely dominated by Europe, discovering and classifying a creature of this magnitude would be a monumental achievement for American science. Properly classifying this monster, which was entirely unknown to science, would be a massive boost to the new nation's scientific prestige. On August 18, 1817, they formed a committee to launch the first ever formal scientific investigation of a sea serpent. Their approach was impressively methodical. They developed a 25-point questionnaire and enlisted a local justice of the peace to collect sworn legal affidavits from eyewitnesses. They treated the investigation like a court case, believing that the path to scientific truth lay in establishing the credibility of human testimony. Witnesses were questioned separately to prevent their stories from influencing one another, and they were asked about everything from the creature's speed to the existence of gills. Then came the breakthrough they'd been hoping for. On September 27th, a strange 3-foot-long black snake was found and eliminated. Its most peculiar feature was a series of distinct humps along its spine. In the charged atmosphere, the conclusion seemed obvious. It had to be a baby sea serpent. The society, desperate for physical proof, seized upon this discovery. They declared the specimen the progeny of the great serpent and gave the new genus a formal Latin name, Scoliophus atlanticus, the Atlantic humped snake. This very scientific-sounding creature was rushed to market, and for a brief moment, the Linnaean Society were heroes. The carcass of Scoliophus atlanticus was even put on public display in Philadelphia, and it was presented not as a sideshow, but as a legitimate scientific find. America finally had its very own discovery from the natural world that could rival anything European scientists were classifying. But the triumph was short-lived. A trained French naturalist, Alexandre Lesueur, got a look at the specimen. With an expert's eye for comparative anatomy, he saw it not as a new marine marvel, but as something tragically mundane. It was a common eastern racer snake that had been afflicted with spinal deformities caused by tumors. The revelation was a public relations catastrophe, and the Linnaean Society was humiliated, with its scientific credibility shattered overnight. The entire affair was immediately rebranded the Gloucester hoax, and the Society's embarrassing mistake gave skeptics all the ammunition they needed. The Society quietly disbanded in 1822, its name forever tied to this failure. Herein lies the central tragedy of the Gloucester serpent story. The debunking of the deformed snake proved only that the Society had misidentified a land animal. It did absolutely nothing to explain what hundreds of people had witnessed in the harbor for weeks. But the spectacular nature of the scientific error poisoned the well, and the small deformed snake became a wider explanation for why the whole thing was fake. Despite this so-called debunking, curious minds have continued to ask what the serpent was for over 200 years. Early skeptics suggested mistaken identity, ranging from a line of dolphins, a large basking shark, or a pod of seals. Yet the witnesses, most of whom were professional mariners, consistently rejected these explanations. More recently, a far more elegant and scientifically grounded explanation has emerged. This theory reframes the entire event not as a monster hunt, but as an environmental tragedy. The story begins with a global catastrophe, the 1815 eruption of Mount Tambora in Indonesia, which led to 1816's Year Without a Summer. The resulting crop failures and collapse of traditional fisheries in New England forced a massive, desperate shift to different kinds of fishing. This meant the sudden deployment of vast amounts of fishing gear, ropes, nets, and the wooden kegs used as floats into coastal waters. This theory decodes the mystery with stunning clarity. The bizarre descriptions suddenly make perfect sense. The line of barrels observed wasn't the creature's back. It was literally a line of wooden fishing floats trailing behind it. The strange vertical motion wasn't a biological function. Rather, It was the desperate, unnatural struggling of a large fish, hopelessly entangled in ropes and debris. The head held out of the water could have been the animal's actual head, or a fluke or fin caught up in the gear. Of course, this theory still fails to account for how so many hardy seamen couldn't distinguish barrels from a biological entity. One possible explanation for the Gloucester serpent lies not in biology, but in psychology. The summer of 1817 was a moment of heightened tension, coming just after the year without a summer, when food shortages and economic stress weighed heavily on coastal communities. In such conditions, the sudden appearance of something strange in the harbor could ignite a powerful cycle of suggestion and belief. Once the first credible witness spoke out, others may have unconsciously reinforced the story through their own observations, fitting what they saw into the growing narrative. This is the essence of mass hysteria, shared expectation shaping perception. In Gloucester, the serpent might not have been a monster at all, but a mirror of collective anxiety projected onto the waves. Ultimately, whatever this sea monster was remains an unsolved mystery, and new hypotheses are constantly being produced to try to explain what it actually was. On the morning of March 10th, 1959, a shocking discovery in a Tokyo river set off one of Japan's most infamous unsolved cases. The body of 27-year-old Tomoko Takakawa, a stewardess for British Overseas Airways Corporation, was found floating face up near a bridge in the Zenpukuji River in Suganami Ward. Born around 1932 in Ashiya City in Hyogo Prefecture, she was raised as part of the country's Catholic minority. And trust me when I say that this factor will be important, so keep it in mind. After high school, she moved to Tokyo to attend the Seibo Junior College of Nursing, a school run by Catholic officials, and later worked back in her hometown as a nurse. Takakawa even became engaged, but her parents did not approve of the marriage, leading her to return to Tokyo for a fresh start. There she took a job at St. Adelia's nursery in Nakano Ward, staying connected to the Catholic community in the city. Ambitious and seeking a new career path, Tomoko set her sights on the burgeoning airline industry. Her uncle worked for British Overseas Airways, and through a process in late 1958, she succeeded in being hired as a flight attendant. In fact, Takakawa was one of only 8 Japanese women selected out of 300 applicants. She was thus among the first group of Japanese stewardesses for the prestigious international airline. She underwent training in London and returned to Tokyo on February 27, 1959, preparing for her first assignment. That first scheduled flight was to be on the Tokyo-Hong Kong route on March 13, 1959. Unfortunately, Tomoko Takakawa would never make that flight. Just days before her official debut, she disappeared and was soon found to have become the victim of a heinous crime. Tomoko Takakawa was last seen alive on Sunday, March 8, 1959. That morning she attended Mass, as she did regularly as a devout Catholic. She then had lunch at her uncle's home near the church. Around 3 p.m., she told family she was going to attend a friend's birthday party in the Ushigomi area of Shinjuku Ward. After that, Tomoko never returned. When she failed to show up for work or home, concern grew. 2 days later, on March 10th, a male office worker spotted something suspicious floating in the shallow Zenpukuji River in western Tokyo. Upon closer examination, he realized that this was a body and alerted the authorities immediately. Police arrived and identified the body as Tomoko Takakawa after finding several of her personal belongings scattered on the riverbank nearby. At first, investigators considered the possibility of an accident, or that the act was committed intentionally, since there were no obvious external wounds on the body. However, An autopsy at Keio University Hospital quickly dispelled those notions. The medical examiner found only a small amount of water in Takekawa's lungs, indicating she had not died by drowning. Instead, subtle marks around her neck suggested she was strangled. In other words, Tomoko had likely been slain before being placed in the water. The autopsy also uncovered forensic evidence. Traces of evidence from two different men were found on her body. This discovery prompted police to broaden their inquiry and seek out information on all the men in Tomoko's recent life. Very quickly, one name emerged as a focal point of the investigation. One of the first major leads came from Tomoko Takekawa's personal notebook and her activities in the days before her death. Investigators discovered the name Father Louis Charles Vermeersch, written in her notebook. Vermeersch was a 38-year-old Catholic priest from Belgium who had been living in Tokyo since 1948. At the time, he worked as head of accounting at a Catholic publishing house affiliated with a church in Suganami Ward, the same ward where Tomoko's body was found. Police learned that on March 7th, just a day before Tomoko vanished, a special delivery parcel from that Catholic publisher had arrived at the airline dormitory where she lived. Investigators believed this package contained a letter from Father Vermeersch requesting to meet with Tomoko. In fact, Tomoko was reportedly carrying that very letter when she left for the birthday party on March 8th. But when her body was recovered 2 days later, the letter was missing. This strongly suggested she did go to meet the priest on the day she disappeared, and that the letter might have been taken by whoever ended her. Perhaps unsurprisingly, Father Vermeersch soon became the prime person of interest in the case. The Catholic priest voluntarily cooperated with police questioning, though the situation was delicate. In April 1959, rumors swirled that the priest had fled Japan. But in reality, he agreed to multiple interrogation sessions in Tokyo. He was accompanied by a Vatican representative and a lawyer sent to protect his rights. A veteran detective, famed for tackling high-profile cases, led the questioning. During these interviews, Father Vermeersch admitted that he had met with Tomoko and even took her to a hotel in the Harajuku area of Tokyo on March 5th, just days before her disappearance. He insisted that the hotel visit was for a quote-unquote consultation, which unsurprisingly raised major red flags for investigators. Despite his denials, police grew convinced that Tomoko and the priest had in fact had relations contrary to his clerical vows. Evidence surfaced indicating they had been in a relationship even before she landed the stewardess job in late 1958. This contradicted the priest's claims of a purely pastoral or platonic connection. Several other findings bolstered the suspicions around Father Vermeersch. Witnesses came forward with a number of intriguing statements. A female employee at a small, seedy hotel on Takeshita Street in Harajuku recalled seeing a foreign man check in around March 5th. This was a notable event at the time, since foreign visitors were rare in that area. When shown a photograph of Father Vermeersch, she confirmed he was the foreign guest she had seen at the hotel. This corroborated the priest's own admission that he had been with Tomoko at a hotel that week, suggesting a secret meeting. A resident living near the bridge where Tomoko's corpse was discovered reported noticing a white sedan parked by the riverside around 5 a.m. on March 10th. Father Vermeersch happened to drive a white Renault sedan, again raising concerns amongst investigators. When police showed this witness a catalog of car models, she pointed to a Renault identical to the one the priest drove. Investigators later heard that the priest had the tires on his car replaced soon after the incident. This is a detail some found suspicious, as if he might have been trying to erase evidence related to potential tire tracks. Tomoko's autopsy revealed her last meal had been a Chinese-style dinner consumed not long before her death. Among the contents of her stomach were mushrooms cut in a distinctive manner. Police traced these to a canned food product sold at a shop outside a local train station, and found a clerk who remembered selling them to a man resembling Father Vermeersch. And personally, something about this aspect of the investigation seems, to phrase it delicately, a bit too perfect. To recognize the specific cut of a specific mushroom and then tie it back to a specific store and then get the guy to say the priest bought it is a little too CSI for me. Investigators also looked into Father Vermeersch's reputation and behavior. Detectives learned that the priest had a history of getting overly familiar with women working at the Catholic nursery where Tomoko had been employed. According to media reports, he was seen embracing female staff and even allegedly doing much more with some of the young women. These accusations of impropriety cast a shadow on his character and made the idea of a secret affair with Tomoko more plausible. Despite this array of circumstantial evidence, there were challenges in building a solid case. Father Vermeersch maintained his innocence and was never formally charged with any crime. He had alibis for the critical time frame around March 8th to 10th, claiming he was elsewhere when Tomoko went missing and when her body was dumped. However, all his alibi witnesses were fellow clergy or church associates, which made police skeptical of their objectivity. That said, he was a Catholic priest, so the fact that for a short period of time, all his close associates who could vouch for him were Catholics is perhaps not that suspicious. By April 1959, inside information on the investigation had leaked to the public, and attention on Father Vermeersch intensified. On April 12th, a television program on NHK called Japan Unmasked even showed the priest's portrait photo pinned up at an immigration office. Other news outlets quickly picked up the story. The sensational nature of the crime made headlines, and public sentiment began to turn against the foreign priest. The Catholic Church in Japan, however, closed ranks in support of Father Vermeersch. He never made any public statements himself, but church officials spoke on his behalf. Maximilian von Furstenberg, the Vatican ambassador to Japan at the time, gave a comment declaring his solemn conviction that the priest was fully innocent. This public defense highlighted the sensitive diplomatic and religious dimensions of the case. Internationally, the handling of the investigation drew some criticism as well. News of the case made significant waves in America as well. In early June 1959, Congressman Frank Bowe stood before the U.S. House of Representatives and read aloud an English-language editorial from a Japanese newspaper. The writer noted that the priest had been hounded publicly by the police for weeks on end and effectively had his reputation ruined without ever being charged with a crime. The congressman echoed the article's concern that a man could be subjected to intense suspicion in the press with no recourse since no formal charges were filed. Notably, just 6 months after the crime, a movie was released depicting the priest slaying Tomoko, capturing popular sentiment at the time. This movie was sensationalistic and extremely popular, but was pulled from theaters after it caused an international incident and concern from both Japanese Catholics and church officials. Over the years, several theories have been proposed to explain who ended Tomoko Takekawa and why, though none have been proven. The primary theory during the initial investigation was that Father Vermeersch was indeed the perpetrator, acting either out of passion, panic, or some other personal motive. Perhaps Tomoko wanted to end the relationship or threatened to expose it, leading the priest to commit extreme violence against her. This theory casts the crime as a tragic culmination of an illicit romance, and it was reinforced by the various witness accounts tying the priest to Tomoko's last known activities. However, lacking a confession or definitive proof, alternative theories have also emerged. One major line of speculation involves criminal smuggling as a motive. In late 1960, a Japanese mystery writer, Seicho Matsumoto, published a novel titled Black Gospel, loosely based on the Takekawa case. In Matsumoto's fictional retelling, The priest character enlists the flight attendant to help smuggle illicit substances, and he ultimately has to silence her permanently. This imaginative theory introduced the idea that Tomoko's slaying might have been connected to some trade using airline staff as couriers. Interestingly, around that same time, the airline she had worked for was dealing with very real-life smuggling issues among its employees. In 1960, a gold smuggling scandal was uncovered that led to 27 employees being dismissed for their involvement. Tomoko had been scheduled to work the Tokyo-Hong Kong flight, a route that, as later reports noted, was a known corridor for smugglers in the week of her slaying. This coincidence led some to wonder if she might have stumbled onto a smuggling operation or been recruited to participate in one. Another unresolved question that feeds various theories is the presence of DNA from a second man on Tomoko's body. Police never identified who the second individual was or whether he had any role in the crime. This opens the door to theories that perhaps someone else, possibly a different lover or an unknown assailant, was with Tomoko around the time of her death. If Father Vermeersch was innocent, the real perpetrator could have been this other man whose biological evidence was found. Was Tomoko seeing another man, or had she been assaulted by someone other than the priest? Unfortunately, the investigation didn't publicly pursue any specific alternate suspect, which, given the evidence which was found on her, sounds fairly negligent. Some critics have wondered if the focus on the foreign priest caused authorities and media to overlook other leads or potential Japanese suspects. Given the lack of information on any other persons of interest, the identity and involvement of the second man remains a mystery within the wider mystery. By June 1959, after months of enduring suspicion, Father Vermeersch took the opportunity to leave Japan. On June 10, 1959, 3 days before he was due for a sixth round of police questioning, he appeared at Haneda Airport seeking to depart the country. Alerted by immigration officials, police officials debated what to do. In the end, because there was no arrest warrant or charges filed, they had no legal grounds to hold him. The priest was permitted to board an Air France flight out of Japan the next day, June 11th. Before departure, a reporter on the same plane got a brief comment from Vermeersch. He said the church had ordered him back to Belgium and that he wished to see his aging parents, but he professed willingness to cooperate with Japanese authorities. Once he left, however, he never returned to Japan, and he never further cooperated with Japanese officials. The departure of the primary suspect caused an uproar in Japan. Father Vermeersch settled overseas, in eastern Canada by 1960, and lived out the rest of his long life quietly. In March 2017, he passed away at the age of 96 in New Brunswick, Canada. Unsurprisingly, his obituary in a local Canadian newspaper made no mention of the Tomoko Takakawa case, reflecting perhaps that he was never officially charged or convicted of anything. After years of investigation without resolution, police formally closed the case on March 10, 1974, exactly 15 years after Tomoko Takakawa's slaying. Under Japanese law at the time, the statute of limitations for the crime was 15 years, meaning that by that date, no one could be charged even if new evidence emerged. The case was labeled unsolved, and the files were shelved. In the decades since, no conclusive new evidence has come to light that would identify the perpetrator or perpetrators. The physical evidence collected was never matched to a perpetrator, and it's unclear if it's still available given the fact that the case was closed. In my view, the initial investigation into Tomoko Takakawa's case was severely compromised by tunnel vision, intense media scrutiny, and international pressure, resulting in critical missteps. Police quickly fixated on Vermeersch due to his controversial relationship with Tomoko, neglecting other significant leads. The most obvious of these leads is the evidence from the second unidentified male found on her body. Evidence was mishandled or ignored, potential witnesses inadequately questioned, and the focus on the priest overshadowed other credible theories. With Vermeersch's departure from Japan, crucial investigative momentum dissipated, ensuring key evidence vanished and leaving enduring doubts. In my view, due to these fundamental investigative errors, the identity of the perpetrator will remain forever uncertain. That said, maybe this didn't fully come down to investigative errors, but also high-level political intervention. The scene is set on the docks of Georgetown, South Carolina, on the final day of 1812. A 29-year-old woman, frail from chronic illness, and shattered by a grief so profound it had hollowed out her world, boards a small, swift schooner named the Patriot. This is Theodosia Burr Alston, daughter of the nation's disgraced third Vice President Aaron Burr and the then current First Lady of South Carolina. She's embarking on a desperate journey, a gamble against immense odds, through the blockaded waters of the Atlantic coast. Her destination is New York City, and her purpose is to see the one person who had always been the center of her universe: her father. This voyage was a perilous undertaking from its inception. The conflict with the British was raging, and ships patrolled the coast, forming a formidable wooden blockade. Her husband, South Carolina's Governor Joseph Alston, was bound by his duties and couldn't travel with her. The route itself would take her directly past Cape Hatteras, a notoriously dangerous stretch of coast already known as the Graveyard of the Atlantic. On top of these external threats, Theodosia's own health was fragile, worn down by years of sickness and the recent devastating loss of her only child. Yet she insisted. The need to reunite with her father after a 5-year separation overrode all caution. The Patriot would sail out of Georgetown Harbor, catch the winter wind, and vanish from the pages of history. To understand the depth of the tragedy, one must first understand the woman at its center. Theodosia wasn't merely a historical footnote. She was a remarkable figure, a product of a revolutionary era and the singular, intense focus of a brilliant and controversial father. Theodosia's upbringing was an experiment in Enlightenment ideals. While other girls of her station were taught the genteel arts, Theodosia studied a rigorous curriculum of Latin, Greek, mathematics, and philosophy. Her mother, Theodosia Prevost, was herself an intellectual and patriot who hosted American officers at her home during the Revolution. When her mother perished in 1794, Theodosia was only 11, and the already intense bond with her father deepened. At just 14, she stepped into the role of hostess at Richmond Hill, Burr's stately New York estate. She presided over dinners with the nation's most powerful and influential men, including figures like James Madison and Alexander Hamilton, astonishing them with her intellect and grace. She was, by many accounts, one of the best educated women in the young American Republic. In 1801, at the age of 18, Theodosia married Joseph Alston, a wealthy and politically ambitious planter from South Carolina. Their union was complex, and while their letters suggest a genuine affection, the marriage was also a strategic alliance for the perpetually cash-strapped Aaron Burr. In short, he saw the value in a connection to the nation's wealthy and aristocratic Southern gentry. Unfortunately, the move to South Carolina's humid, swampy climate proved detrimental to Theodosia's health. The birth of her only son, Aaron Burr Alston, was a difficult one in 1802, and left her with chronic, lifelong medical problems that would plague her for the rest of her short life. Theodosia's life was inextricably tied to the dramatic arc of her father's political career. She stood by him with unwavering loyalty through his darkest moments, including the infamous 1804 duel with Alexander Hamilton and his subsequent trial. She was his staunchest defender during his sensational 1807 trial for treason, where Burr was accused of plotting to create his own empire in the American West. After his acquittal, he fled to a self-imposed exile in Europe, and for years, Theodosia worked tirelessly to secure his return. The final devastating blow to her already fragile state came in June 1812, when her son perished due to malaria. The loss of her son, combined with her chronic illness, sent her into a deep depression and physical collapse. This personal apocalypse set the stage for her final act. When Aaron Burr finally returned to New York that same year, the reunion was no longer a desire, but a desperate existential need. The schooner chosen for the voyage, the Patriot, was no ordinary passenger vessel. It was a famously fast ship, originally built as a pilot boat, a class of vessel prized for its speed and agility. In 1812, it had been commissioned by the U.S. government as a privateer, a privately owned ship authorized to attack enemy vessels. For months, the Patriot had been preying on British shipping in the West Indies, and its hold was likely filled with a valuable cargo of plunder from these raids. For Theodosia's journey, the ship was deliberately disguised to avoid enemy attention. Its weapons were dismounted and stowed below deck, and its name was painted over. It was a wolf in sheep's clothing, its aggressive past hidden beneath a veneer of civilian transport. This disguise, intended as a safety measure, would have a profound consequence. Any wreckage that might have washed ashore would have been nearly impossible to identify, preventing a conclusive discovery and leaving the door wide open for speculation. Aware of the immense risks, Theodosia's family took what precautions they could. Governor Alston, leveraging his official position, provided the ship's captain with a formal letter addressed to the commander of the British fleet. The letter explained his wife's situation and requested, as a matter of gentlemanly gallantry, safe passage through the blockade should they be caught. If the British did capture the ship, this letter was supposed to ensure that they were free to loot the cargo in return for safe passage for the ship. On the other end, from New York, Aaron Burr arranged for a trusted friend, Dr. Timothy Green, to travel south and accompany his daughter on the voyage. Theodosia was also attended by her personal maid, whom she had a friendly relationship with. The Patriot set sail from Georgetown on New Year's Eve, 1812. The journey to New York, under normal conditions with a fast ship like the Patriot, was expected to take about 5 or 6 days. For 2 days, the voyage seems to have been uneventful. On January 2nd, 1813, the last known, verifiable contact with the ship occurred. As it sailed off the treacherous coast of Cape Hatteras, the Patriot was intercepted by a British warship. Governor Alston's letter worked precisely as intended, and after reviewing the document, the British commander waved the small schooner on its way. This moment marks the critical turning point, the last instant the Patriot and its passengers were ever confirmed to be seen alive. Later that very night, a violent winter gale swept through the area. The storm was so severe that it scattered the powerful, well-armed ships of the British fleet. The small, swift Patriot, having just been waved through the blockade, would have sailed directly into the clutches of the storm. After that night, no trace of the ship, its cargo, its crew, or its distinguished passenger was ever found. In the weeks and months that followed, as hope turned to despair, 2 competing narratives emerged to explain the silence from the sea. One was grounded in the grim probability of maritime disaster, and the other in the lurid and sensational world of piracy. The most logical and widely accepted explanation for the Patriot's disappearance is that it was simply overwhelmed by the forces of nature. This theory is supported by the strongest circumstantial evidence available. The confirmed last sighting of the ship off Cape Hatteras was followed immediately by a documented severe gale, powerful enough to disperse a naval fleet. The waters off North Carolina's Outer Banks were already infamous for their shifting shoals and violent weather. This was the conclusion reached by the two men who knew Theodosia best, her husband and her father. Both Joseph Alston and Aaron Burr, after frantic initial searches, came to believe she was lost at sea. Burr, a man of intense pragmatism, consistently dismissed the more sensational rumors of piracy. He stated with grim certainty that if his daughter were still alive, there was nothing in the world that could keep the two of them apart. Despite the logical explanation of the storm, a darker and more dramatic narrative quickly took hold. This theory claims that the Patriot, laden with privateering treasure, fell victim to foul play. The culprits varied in the telling. Sometimes they were pirates who captured the ship on the open sea. These land-based pirates were said to operate along the coast, luring ships onto the shoals on stormy nights with false lights. Once a vessel ran aground, the wreckers would swarm it, eliminating any survivors and plundering the cargo. For over half a century, the mystery of Theodosia's fate remained a tragic family story and a piece of maritime lore, with the storm theory as the most logical explanation. Then, in 1869, a strange discovery on the Outer Banks of North Carolina reignited the mystery and gave it a tangible, haunting focus that has kept it alive ever since. The story begins when a physician from Elizabeth City, Dr. William Poole, was called to treat an ailing, impoverished elderly woman. She resided in the remote community of Nag's Head. Having no money to pay for his services, she offered him her only valuable possession, a beautiful, professional oil portrait of a young woman. The painting's origin story was pure folklore. The most common version held that the woman's first husband had taken the portrait from a deserted ship that washed ashore around 1813. Dr. Poole, who was familiar with the legend of Theodosia's disappearance, became convinced that the elegant woman in the painting was her. He theorized that she had been carrying it as a gift for her father, a final memento of the daughter he hadn't seen in 5 years. When photographs of the portrait were shown to descendants of the Burr family, they agreed that the resemblance was striking. However, it was showed to others who knew her in life, and they found that it didn't look anything like her at all. The painting, now known as the Nag's Head portrait, eventually found a home in Yale University's Lewis Walpole Library, where it remains a key artifact in this unsolved mystery. Whether this painting actually depicts Theodosia remains unclear, but personally, I think the resemblance is uncanny. If you're one of those people who just listens, I've put a confirmed portrait of Theodosia on the left, with the Nag's Head portrait on the right. Let me know if you think this depicts the same person or not. As for what happened to Theodosia herself, I tend to think the simplest explanation is also the correct one here. All evidence points to the ship simply being caught in a storm and being destroyed. Since the ship was deliberately not showing any identification, so as to run through the British blockade, this would have complicated any identification efforts later on. Notably, pirates operating along the Carolina coast in 1813 typically sought ransom when possible, and Theodosia was the daughter of Aaron Burr and the wife of a governor. It would have been immediately and readily apparent, just by her clothing and manner of speech, that at the very least she was a woman of wealth and means. Had she fallen into their hands, her survival would have been immensely more profitable than eliminating her. The absence of any efforts to exploit her social and political connections undermines the idea that pirates were responsible. Hey everyone, it's Jimmy just reminding you to like and subscribe and also to share this video. Also, don't forget to check out the video podcast, Lazy Chill History, by clicking the link in the description. On a chilly March night in 1923, a Buick coupe sat abandoned on a downtown St. Louis street corner. Its engine was cold and its driver missing. Police towed it with little fanfare until they learned the car belonged to a Catholic priest from Illinois who had vanished. The disappearance of Father John Raniak soon gripped the region and became one of the era's most haunting unsolved mysteries. John Raniak was not the kind of man anyone expected to vanish. At 28, he was a beloved priest in the small town of Virden, Illinois. Born in 1895 to Slovak immigrants, John grew up in a devout family and felt an early calling to the church. He was ordained in 1917 and assigned to Virden's Sacred Heart Catholic Church, where he quickly became a pillar of the community. He was cheerful, energetic, and devoted to his parishioners. He lived with his mother and siblings and spent his days ministering to families and organizing community events. By 1923, Father John seemed happy and settled, and nothing in his life hinted at the possibility that he would simply disappear. Monday, March 5th, 1923, began as a routine day for Father Raniak. He set out on the 85-mile drive from Virden to St. Louis to purchase supplies for a church bazaar. He often combined such errands with visits to friends, and that day he hoped to see Father Vincent Linek, a close pal serving at a St. Louis parish. John left Virden in the morning driving his gray Buick. He arrived in St. Louis before noon and stopped at Father Linek's home, but his friend wasn't there. John left a note and proceeded downtown to do his shopping. Witnesses later recalled seeing the young priest calmly buying goods in the afternoon, around 2:30 p.m. Once he'd completed his errands, he headed back toward Illinois, planning to be home that night as promised. We know Father John made it part way. In Venice, Illinois, just across the river from St. Louis, a mechanic reported that John stopped at his garage for a quick car repair early that evening. The priest continued on his way after the fix, but that brief encounter in Venice was the last time anyone saw Father Raniak. When Father John did not return home on Monday night, worry began to spread in Virden. It was unlike him to be out of contact, and by Tuesday morning, his family and parishioners were anxious. Phone calls to friends and neighboring parishes turned up no sign of him. On Wednesday, March 7th, a group of concerned Virden residents traveled to St. Louis to report the priest missing and help search. Only then did a crucial clue emerge, and the police realized that they had already found Father John's car before anyone knew he was missing. Inside the vehicle, investigators found disturbing signs. Papers belonging to the priest were scattered on the front seat, as if someone had rifled through them or there had been a struggle. One was a bill for a film ironically titled The Victim. More chilling was what someone had left in the back seat area of the vehicle. Scratched into the paint were the words, "We won." These two words, gouged in 6-inch letters, felt like a cruel taunt from whoever had taken Father John. Police also noticed mud and bits of cornstalk clinging to the undercarriage, suggesting the car had been driven off-road into farm fields. And tellingly, the St. Christopher medal that John kept in his car, a patron saint charm for safe travel, was missing, its clasp pried empty. It seemed clear that somewhere after leaving St. Louis, the priest had met with foul play. The mystery of the missing priest captured headlines, and law enforcement from Missouri and Illinois mobilized. Search parties scoured the roadsides and woods along Father John's route, Volunteers dragged the river shallows and checked every ditch, well, and ravine where a body might be. But aside from the ominous clues in the car, nothing was found. Father John had vanished without a trace. With publicity came a flood of tips and a fair share of false leads. In early April, a St. Louis newspaper published a sensational claim that Father Raniak had been living a double life as an armed robber. Unsurprisingly, no evidence ever turned up to indicate that this mild-mannered priest had turned to banditry. Another tip, a telegram demanding a ransom and claiming the priest would be returned safely, also turned out to be a hoax. In the absence of answers, theories swirled. One idea was that Father John might have disappeared by choice, abandoning his clerical life. Those who knew him vehemently rejected this, and he had given no indication of despair or desire to leave. Suspects were investigated, but no evidence turned up in relation to any of them. The most ominous suspect was a man named Andrew Rolando. Rolando was a fugitive who was known for what was euphemistically called at the time anti-Catholic sentiment. And by anti-Catholic sentiment, I'm underselling what he did here in a massive way. He was already wanted for slaying a priest in another state in 1921. It was easy to imagine that this dangerous man might have crossed paths with Father Raniak on that fateful evening. Yet, like all other leads, nothing definitive came of it, and Rolando was never caught or questioned in connection with the case, and there was no hard proof he was involved. That said, he was confirmed to be in the area at the time. Despite the incredible passage of time, there is faint hope that this case will one day be solved. Father Raniak's remains may have been found years ago, and he may be known in some other context as a John Doe, just waiting to have his name returned to him. Genetic genealogy may one day be able to prove this priest is one of the nation's innumerable John Does just waiting to be identified. Rudolf Diesel, the inventor of the diesel engine, vanished under baffling circumstances in 1913. At the height of his career, Diesel boarded a steamship and was never seen alive again. His disappearance on the eve of World War I sparked immediate speculation and debate that continues over a century later. Born in 1858, Rudolf Diesel was a genius engineer, best known for developing the compression-ignition internal combustion engine that bears his name. He envisioned an engine that could deliver unprecedented efficiency compared to the steam engines of the day. Diesel filed his first patent for the engine in 1892, and within a few years he had built successful prototypes. Notably, his design could run on a variety of fuels. An early model even ran on peanut oil, demonstrating the engine's flexibility. This adaptability meant that engine power could reach parts of the world without ready access to coal or petroleum. By 1912, Diesel's invention was a worldwide success, with over 70,000 engines in use globally. Diesel himself became a wealthy and respected figure, celebrated for an innovation that was transforming industry and transportation. On the evening of September 29, 1913, Rudolf Diesel boarded the SS Dresden, a steamship in Antwerp, Belgium, bound for Harwich, England. He planned to attend the opening of a new diesel engine plant and to meet with British Royal Navy officials about installing diesel engines in submarines. Diesel dined on board and retired to his cabin around 10 p.m., asking to be awakened at 6:15 a.m. the next day. That morning, however, he didn't answer his wake-up call. Crew who checked his cabin found it completely empty. Tellingly, the bed had not been slept in, and a clean nightshirt was laid out, while his watch was left on the bedside, as if he had prepared for bed but never actually went to sleep. More ominous clues were found up on deck. Diesel's hat and neatly folded overcoat were discovered beneath the afterdeck railing, near the ship's stern. The ship was searched, but no trace of the missing inventor turned up during the voyage. It appeared that Diesel had gone overboard during the night. Roughly 10 days later, on October 10th, 1913, crew on a Dutch vessel in the North Sea came upon a body floating in the water. The corpse was badly decomposed and unrecognizable, so the sailors retrieved personal items from the clothing and returned the body to the sea, as was the style at the time. These recovered belongings were later identified by Diesel's son as items his father carried, providing tragic confirmation that Rudolf Diesel had died at sea. In the days following Diesel's disappearance, puzzling clues emerged about his state of mind and finances. Shortly before his trip, Diesel had given his wife, Martha, a tightly sealed bag with instructions that it not be opened until a week later. After he vanished, Martha opened the parcel and found 20,000 German marks in cash, along with financial statements indicating that the family's bank accounts were nearly empty. Despite Diesel's fame and the commercial success of his engine, he had suffered serious personal financial troubles due to bad investments. It turned out that despite maintaining the image of a wealthy and successful industrialist, he was essentially bankrupt, at least on a personal level. Investigators also learned that in Diesel's diary, a small cross mark had been drawn next to the date September 29th, 1913, as if ominously marking it as the day of his death. These revelations painted a picture of a man who might have been planning for the end, and they would heavily influence one of the leading theories about his fate. The world reacted with shock to the news of Diesel's disappearance. Officially, authorities eventually deemed his death a likely self-ending, given the evidence of financial ruin and his last recorded actions. However, the mysterious circumstances, a prominent inventor vanishing from a ship without witnesses, fueled rampant speculation in the press and public. Almost immediately, newspapers offered sensational explanations. But let's discuss what might be the most likely theory first, before we get into those. One straightforward theory is that Rudolf Diesel ended it all by leaping into the sea voluntarily. Proponents of this view point to his dire financial straits and personal issues as compelling motives. The documents found in his wife's keeping showed that Diesel had virtually no money left, which would have been a crushing revelation for a man of his stature. That said, while this is the way the case is reported, I have to question this somewhat. While Rudolf Diesel may have indeed been heavily in debt and virtually bankrupt, relatively speaking, he held extremely valuable patents. And this isn't just speculation. The most powerful navy in the world at the time had called him specifically to discuss implementing his patented technology into their submarines. What I'm saying is that the vast majority of people, even wealthy people, would feel blessed to be this quote-unquote broke. Further, the value of the patents themselves has to also be taken into account. He could have sold the rights to his revolutionary patents and become fabulously wealthy in an instant, given the revolutionary nature of his technology, which he fully owned. All that said, it's entirely possible that Diesel, despite being an engineering genius, wasn't a financial genius and didn't fully understand or realize this. After all, he did manage to lose the vast majority of his wealth due to poor investments in the first place. In addition, Diesel had been suffering from health problems and exhaustion in the years leading up to 1913. Faced with mounting debts and physical ailments, it's plausible he fell into despair. Supporters of the theory also cite the eerie preparation he seemed to make, such as setting out his nightshirt and marking his diary as if anticipating death. Sometimes the simplest answer is the right one, and Diesel jumping overboard of his own accord is a straightforward narrative. Yet some aspects don't entirely make sense. For instance, why didn't he leave a note behind, or a more direct indication? From the moment Diesel disappeared, theories of foul play have captured the public imagination. One hypothesis centers on German agents or the government of Kaiser Wilhelm II. In 1913, Europe was on the brink of war, and Diesel's inventions had significant military value. Diesel had refused to grant Germany exclusive rights to his engine, and he was heading to England to discuss aiding the British Navy, a potential threat to German naval ambitions. The British Royal Navy was interested in using diesel engines to power its submarines, and Diesel's meeting in London about submarine engines was no secret. This fueled suspicions that German operatives might have removed him to stop Britain from gaining an even more significant naval edge than they already had. And after all, Germany's diesel-powered submarines would end up being essentially the only way Imperial Germany could give the Royal Navy and British commerce a black eye in the war. While this scenario offers a very clear motive, denying Britain a strategic technology, no hard evidence has ever emerged to prove Diesel was slain for military reasons. A more fringe theory suggests that a German nationalist may have taken the matter into his own hands when he saw Diesel on the ship. And yeah, for those of you listening very closely, that was an intentional pun. Under this theory, Rudolf Diesel's working with the British was seen as a betrayal by this unknown assailant, as Diesel was German. Another popular theory, also related to foul play, suggests a slaying by an industrial rival. Rudolf Diesel's engine was revolutionary not just for navies, but also for the energy industry. The diesel engine could run on oils derived from plants as well as petroleum, threatening to upend the fuel status quo. This led some to speculate that powerful oil interests wanted diesel out of the picture. In fact, as early as 1913, the press speculated about conspiracies involving big American oil firms. However, historians and energy experts generally find this theory unconvincing. Diesel engines at that time were mostly used in industrial and marine applications, and there was no infrastructure to mass-produce vegetable oil fuel in competition with petroleum. While processes did exist for creating biodiesel fuels, these wouldn't become economically viable for half a century after the supposed hit. What's also forgotten is that early 20th century oil barons were still profiting from selling diesel fuel, which is itself derived from petroleum. Diesel's invention was actually a significant benefit to the oil business, not a death knell. Other theories have been floated over the last century but haven't gained much traction. Crossing the North Sea in late September could be perilous, and it's conceivable that Diesel simply fell overboard. Perhaps he decided to take a stroll on the moonlit deck to clear his head and lost his footing, tumbling into the cold water below. Diesel was known to have health issues. It's possible he suffered a dizzy spell, heart attack, or stroke that caused him to fall from the ship by accident. Supporters of the accident theory point out that no evidence of foul play was found at the scene. His belongings were left undisturbed, and there were no signs of a fight. Michael Rockefeller was the 23-year-old son of New York Governor Nelson Rockefeller and a member of one of America's most prominent and influential families. In 1961, during a trip to what was then Dutch New Guinea, he disappeared under mysterious circumstances, sparking global intrigue that continues to this day. Although Michael's family connections opened countless doors, Michael was known for having a genuine curiosity about people from other cultures. He'd studied at Harvard University, where he developed a particular interest in anthropology and the arts of non-Western societies. Following his graduation in 1960, Michael decided to pursue that passion in earnest. He became involved with the Peabody Museum's Harvard Peabody New Guinea expedition, which focused on documenting and studying the art and culture of the Asmat people. Asmat are indigenous to southwestern New Guinea, a region known for its dense rainforests, intricate carving traditions, and, at that time, minimal outside influence. Michael was especially captivated by Asmat art, wooden carvings and sculptures that were integral to their spiritual and cultural practices. The Asmat region was remote and challenging to navigate, with thick swamps, frequent flooding, and virtually no modern amenities. Michael Rockefeller was undeterred by these difficulties and was determined to collect artifacts that would eventually be displayed in his father's Museum of Primitive Art in New York. During one of his expeditions in 1961, Michael and anthropologist Renee Wassing traveled down a major river in a dugout canoe. This trip would ultimately be his last. On November 17th, near the mouth of a river running into the Arafura Sea, their canoe was swamped and overturned. Michael, Renee Wassing, and two local guides clung to the overturned vessel. When it became evident they were drifting farther away from the shore, Michael allegedly said something akin to, "I think I can make it," and he swam off in search of help. The guides and Renee Wassing were later rescued, but Michael was never seen again. When news reached Dutch authorities and local inhabitants that Michael had vanished, a massive search commenced. Helicopters, airplanes, and patrol boats scoured the coastline, while local tribespeople helped comb the thick jungles. And yeah, let's just be clear here. Michael's powerful family connections meant that no expense was spared in the efforts to find him. For weeks, the search turned up little more than rumors. Dutch officials eventually determined that Michael had likely drowned or been attacked by sharks in the choppy waters. On November 24, 1961, the official declaration was that Michael Rockefeller was presumed dead. Even as Dutch authorities concluded their search, theories were already circulating about what might have really happened to Michael. One of the most persistent rumors is that he made it to shore only to be slain and potentially consumed by local tribesmen. This practice had historically been practiced in the Asmat region, though Dutch pacification efforts had largely reduced these rituals by the 1960s. Still, tales related to this sort of activity, especially involving a Rockefeller, seized the global imagination. Over the years, various explorers and writers have claimed to uncover new evidence supporting this theory. Some accounts reference alleged confessions from Asmat tribespeople, while others cite hearsay or secondhand stories passed down locally. Critics point out that most of these claims come from sensationalized sources or lack concrete proof. Bones or remains that could be definitively identified as Michael's have never been found. Another theory claims that Michael survived and chose to or was forced to live among the Asmat and remained there in secrecy. Though this idea is often dismissed as far-fetched, the concept of Westerners going native and leaving behind modernity is something that has historically occurred on occasion. One photograph purports to show a white man living amongst the Asmat, rowing a boat alongside his fellow tribesmen. And yes, you may want to look at the screen and see what you think of this picture. I think the likely best explanation may be that the man depicted is simply a massive outlier in terms of skin pigmentation, but there's always the possibility that this does depict Michael. Still, despite all this, no verified sightings of Michael have ever been documented. In the decades following Michael's disappearance, investigative journalists, explorers, and even some family associates have revisited the Asmat region. Perhaps the most notable was journalist Milt Macklin, who conducted an in-depth investigation in the 1960s, traveling to the area and interviewing locals. Macklin uncovered stories that seemed to point to Michael being slain by tribesmen, but he never found definitive proof. Also, full disclosure, Macklin is best known for his work surrounding the Bermuda Triangle, so he may have had a slight flair for sensationalism. In 2014, writer Carl Hoffman published Savage Harvest, which reignited public interest by presenting evidence that Michael was indeed slain as part of a revenge ritual. According to Hoffman, Michael was mistaken as a representative of the Dutch colonial regime. However, Hoffman's claims rely heavily on hearsay and questionable first-hand accounts from people who were speaking of events generations ago. The Rockefeller family has, for the most part, maintained privacy regarding Michael's fate. Nelson Rockefeller rarely spoke publicly about his son's disappearance, and official statements have never ventured beyond the conclusion that Michael was presumed drowned. For some, the lack of public family involvement only adds to the mystery. This has led theorists to wonder if they knew Michael wanted to get away from his privileged life and live with the Asmat. And if I haven't been very clear about this thus far, Michael Rockefeller was legitimately passionate about the Asmat and their art and culture, and wanted to experience it all firsthand. Though Michael Rockefeller's disappearance will probably never be fully resolved, his legacy lives on through the art he collected and the interest he sparked in the Asmat region. Launched in 1972, the MS München was a carrier ship owned by German shipping giant Hapag-Lloyd and designed to transport lighter barges across the ocean. And quick note for anyone unfamiliar, München is the German name for the city of Munich. On December 7, 1978, she departed Bremerhaven, Germany, en route to Savannah, Georgia, carrying 83 barges loaded with steel products and a crew of 28. By December 12th, the ship encountered a severe storm in the North Atlantic. Despite the harsh conditions, the ship was considered capable of withstanding such weather. However, in the early hours of December 12th, a distress signal was received, indicating the ship was in peril. The distress call prompted one of the largest search operations in maritime history. 13 aircraft and 110 ships from various nations scoured an area 5 times the size of Germany. The search was hampered by the severe weather and inaccurate positioning, delaying the rescue efforts. Over 10 days, searchers found only 3 barges, 4 unused lifeboats, 2 life jackets, and 2 life rings. Notably, one of the recovered lifeboats showed signs of significant damage. The pins securing it, located about 65 feet above the waterline, were bent backward, suggesting a massive force had torn it from its position. The official investigation concluded that an unusual event caused by severe weather led to the sinking. However, the exact nature of this event remained unclear. The damage to the lifeboat, positioned 65 feet above the waterline, led to speculation about the involvement of a rogue wave. At the time, rogue waves were considered rare and largely theoretical. The concept of such waves gained credibility after an 84-foot rogue wave was recorded in 1995, providing concrete evidence of their existence. This discovery led many to revisit the ship's disappearance, considering a rogue wave as a plausible cause. The theory suggests that the München could have encountered a rogue wave of up to 100 feet high. Such a wave could have overwhelmed the vessel, causing catastrophic damage and leading to its rapid sinking. The bent lifeboat pins support this hypothesis, indicating a forceful impact from above. Another theory suggests that the 83 barges on board the ship were to blame. If these barges broke loose in a storm and all shifted simultaneously, it's possible that this cargo shift could have caused the entire ship to capsize. A much more controversial theory suggests that the ship may have struck a NATO or Soviet submarine. Under this theory, the damage caused by the strike was covered up. At present, the rogue wave theory is considered to be by far the most likely. The ship's wreckage still remains below the sea, and if it were ever located, it's likely that the true cause of this mysterious maritime vanishing could be solved. On September 19, 1977, 52-year-old Yutaka Kume vanished without a trace from the Noto Peninsula in Ishikawa Prefecture in Japan. What initially appeared to be a simple local disappearance spiraled into a massive international incident, likely involving North Korean agents. Kume, a security guard employed at Tokyo's Mitaka City Hall, had traveled to the scenic coastal area reportedly for a short trip. The day before he disappeared, he phoned a colleague and casually mentioned, quote, "I'm at a hot spring in the Noto Peninsula right now. which would be the last time anyone heard from him. The next day, Kume was seen walking along a beach near the town of Ushitsu in Noto, and then he simply never returned. Initial efforts to find Kume yielded few clues, and local police combed the coastline and interviewed residents, but no witnesses could clearly explain what happened that evening. In the absence of immediate evidence of foul play, speculation began to swirl. Strangely, a local newspaper in November 1977 even suggested that Kume might have defected to North Korea by boat. This idea, that a middle-aged City Hall security guard would abruptly flee Japan for North Korea, seemed far-fetched. Yet, with no body found and Kume gone, more conventional theories, such as an accidental drowning or voluntary disappearance, struggled to account for the mystery. Unbeknownst to the public at the time, however, Japanese police had already encountered alarming signs that something far more sinister had occurred on that Noto beach. Behind the scenes, investigators had suspicions that were not immediately revealed to the media. On the very evening of Kume's disappearance, police in Ishikawa received a report of a suspicious boat spotted in nearby Toyama Bay. That night, Kume was staying at a local inn with another man, and the inn's owner grew uneasy when the pair went out late, since there was nowhere obvious to go after dark on the quiet coast. The police were put on high alert, and officers rushed to the area. They arrived to find that Kume was already gone, but his companion, a Korean national identified only as Lee, was still on shore. Lee was promptly arrested, though only on minor charges of violating immigration registration laws. When police searched his belongings and home, they uncovered clandestine tools of espionage, including cipher tables and code books. These startling finds strongly suggested that Lee was a North Korean agent or collaborator involved in a covert operation. Despite these red flags, the case did not immediately transform into a well-publicized kidnapping investigation. Incredibly, Lee was never prosecuted for abducting Kume. He was released after a suspended indictment, and even later allowed to naturalize as a Japanese citizen. At the time, authorities treated the incident cautiously. The full details were kept quiet, and for years the public narrative barely acknowledged any crime. In fact, the incident was long reported merely as a minor story about a Japanese man illegally leaving Japan for the Korean peninsula. Over the following decades, patterns began to emerge that cast Kume's disappearance in a new light. In the late 1970s and early 1980s, a number of Japanese citizens mysteriously vanished, many of them from coastal areas, under puzzling circumstances. By the 1990s, the families of these missing people, alongside the help of investigative journalists, started connecting the dots. What they discovered was one of the biggest stories in post-war Japanese history. They suspected that North Korean agents had been covertly kidnapping Japanese citizens during that era. These once unthinkable claims gained credibility through evidence and even admissions by North Korean operatives. Eventually, the Japanese government officially recognized 17 cases of abduction by North Korean spies, with Yutaka Kume listed as the earliest known victim. Kume's case, in particular, fits the now established pattern of North Korean abductions. According to investigations by Japanese police, Kume was targeted by a North Korean spy network operating inside Japan. In Tokyo, he was approached by a man later identified as Kim Si-ho, a North Korean agent using the alias Yoshida. Kim, with the help of several North Korean residents in Japan, allegedly enticed Kume with a proposal for a lucrative business deal. This ruse was likely a trap. Once Kume agreed to travel with them, purportedly to discuss the deal, he was escorted to Ishikawa Prefecture. There, on a quiet Noto beach, Kim's team handed Kume over to another operative who was waiting with a boat. Under cover of darkness, Kume was taken across the Sea of Japan by boat, bound for North Korea. It was effectively a state-sponsored kidnapping, an ordinary Japanese citizen snatched from home shores and spirited away to a foreign land. The motive behind such abductions later became somewhat clearer. During the 1970s and 1980s, North Korea carried out a secret program to abduct foreigners for various purposes. Japanese nationals were targeted to steal their identities and to train North Korean spies in Japanese language and culture. In several cases, abductees were forced to teach Japanese language classes to North Korean agents, helping them learn how to pass as Japanese abroad. In other more sinister cases, women were forcibly married to North Korean officials and instructed to raise their children as the perfect infiltrators of Japanese society. These children were raised speaking Japanese natively and had all the inherent mannerisms associated with Japanese people rather than North Korean people. This, of course, reminds me of that famous scene in Inglourious Basterds, where a spy makes a 3 sign with his fingers in an American or British way rather than a German way. This, of course, gives him away to the Germans, despite his perfect mastery of the German language, leading to dire consequences. By having the children raised in a perfectly immersive pseudo-Japanese environment, this issue is, in essence, solved. In Kumei's situation, investigators believe he was lured under false pretenses because his abductors saw an opportunity. He was a lonely and unremarkable middle-aged man who could be taken with little public fuss. Indeed, at the time, Kumei lived alone and had been out of touch with his immediate family, which might have made him an easier target. North Korea, for its part, has consistently denied any involvement in Yutaka Kumei's disappearance. In 2002, North Korean leader Kim Jong-il admitted for the first time that North Korea had abducted Japanese citizens in the 1970s and 80s. However, the regime insisted that Kumei never entered North Korea. Despite these denials, Japanese authorities consider the North Korean abduction theory to be the most credible explanation by far. In January 2003, based on accumulated evidence and testimony, Japanese police took the unprecedented step of obtaining an arrest warrant for Kim Si-ho. By way of reminder, he was the North Korean spy alleged to have orchestrated Kumei's kidnapping. It was the first time a direct arrest warrant was issued for a North Korean agent in an abduction case. Kim, believed to be back in North Korea, was placed on Interpol's wanted list, and Japan formally demanded his extradition. North Korea has refused to cooperate, claiming to have no knowledge of Kim's whereabouts or even his identity. As of today, Kim Si-ho remains a fugitive, and Yutaka Kumei's fate in North Korea, if he indeed was taken there, is still unknown. Imagine sailing on a calm day in the South Pacific when a distress call suddenly crackles over the radio. An SOS so chilling it sends shivers down the spine of even seasoned sailors. A Morse code transmission from a vessel calling itself the Orang Medan pleads for help. The radio operator taps out a dire report that the captain and officers are dead. Likely the entire crew has met the same fate. After a tense pause, the sender's final message comes through. He too is dying. It was a message straight out of a nightmare. An entire ship's crew apparently dead for no discernible reason, pleading for urgent help. Alarmed by that phantom SOS, nearby American merchant ships picked up the distress call, and the closest vessel, often identified as the Silver Star, races toward the given coordinates. At the reported location, they find the Orang Medan adrift and eerily silent. Some of the rescuers later described feeling an unnatural chill inside the ship, despite the tropical heat outside, adding to the sense that they had stepped into a floating nightmare. When the rescue party boards the vessel, they are met with a nightmare scene. The entire crew is dead. Bodies lie scattered with no obvious wounds or injuries, Yet the look on the faces of the fallen is horrifying, eyes wide open and mouths frozen mid-scream, as if their last moments were spent in unimaginable fear. Even the ship's dog lies dead, teeth still bared as though snarling at some unseen threat. With no survivors in sight, the would-be rescuers search for answers in vain. In the radio room, they find the operator who sent the SOS, now lifeless at his station with his hand still on the Morse key. Not a single clue indicates what disaster befell the crew. It's as if death swept over everyone on board in an instant, without a sound or struggle. As the astonished team considers towing the ghost ship to port, they suddenly notice smoke seeping from below deck. A fire has broken out in the cargo hold, cutting their investigation short. The boarding party barely makes it back to the Silver Star before the Orang Medan erupts in a violent explosion. Within minutes, the fateful freighter sinks beneath the waves, carrying its dark secrets to the ocean floor. All that remains is the story, a chilling account destined to become a maritime legend. What could have killed an entire crew so swiftly without leaving a mark on their bodies? Over the decades, several explanations have been proposed, some more plausible than others. Easily, the most popular theory is that the crew was poisoned by toxic cargo. One specific version of this theory claims the ship's hold was filled with potassium cyanide and nitroglycerin. This is a combination that could produce toxic fumes and a deadly explosion if exposed to seawater. Many suspect the Orang Medan was secretly carrying dangerous chemicals, possibly leftover wartime nerve agents or other lethal substances, without proper safety measures. A leak or accidental mixture could have released poisonous gases that snuffed out the crew almost instantly. Such chemicals could also account for the sudden fire and explosion that followed, reacting violently when exposed to seawater. Another hypothesis is carbon monoxide poisoning from a malfunctioning boiler. Carbon monoxide gas is odorless and could have quietly suffocated the crew without warning, which might explain the lack of injuries. However, this theory doesn't entirely fit the evidence. It fails to explain the reports of terrified expressions on the victims' faces, or the explosive finale. A few have even floated the idea of piracy, suggesting that they boarded and used some kind of gas to disable all the occupants. But the ship was found intact and undisturbed, which doesn't line up with an attack for plunder. And of course, there are the paranormal speculations. Ghostly forces, vengeful spirits, even extraterrestrial involvement have all been suggested in fringe discussions. These fantastical theories have no evidence to support them. They mainly underscore just how baffling the Orang Medan mystery is. Finally, some have wondered if the entire incident was covered up. If the Orang Medan was involved in a clandestine operation, perhaps authorities deliberately wiped it from the records and hushed up any witnesses. What you may have noticed is that I didn't question the very foundation of the incident itself, which probably seems logical given how often this case is spoken about. It turns out the biggest question surrounding the Orang Medan mystery is whether any of it happened at all. In the absence of evidence, many suspect that this ghost ship never existed. For starters, no ship named Orang Medan appears in any official records. Researchers have scoured registries and shipping logs, but they've found nothing. A vessel of this size and era should have left some trace, yet there isn't a single legitimate reference to an Orang Medan outside the story itself. That glaring absence is a huge red flag, and it suggests that if a disaster did occur, the ship might have been operating under a different name or outside normal channels. Furthermore, while the rescue ship Silver Star itself was a real merchant vessel, investigators found no record in the Silver Star's logs of any such incident or rescue. If the crew of the Silver Star had truly come upon a ship full of dead men, it is unlikely they would simply sail on without reporting it. The timeline and location details are equally inconsistent, casting more doubt on the story's veracity. Most versions place the incident in the late 1940s around the crowded Strait of Malacca. However, in the earliest known report from late 1940, there was a virtually identical incident near the Solomon Islands in the South Pacific. The major difference between this earliest version is that the creepypasta-type elements were nowhere to be found. In a November 1940 news article, an unnamed merchant marine officer described receiving a strange distress signal. He then notes that he found a ship full of dead sailors before witnessing an explosion that sank the vessel. When basic facts like the date, location, and rescuers keep changing from one source to another, it becomes nearly impossible to verify the truth of the tale. What we do know is that after 1945, the Orang Medan story gained broader circulation through a handful of publications. In early 1948, a Dutch-language Indonesian newspaper ran a series of articles about the supposed incident. These reports, attributed to an Italian writer named Silvio Shirley, introduced the vivid details that have since become legend. Interestingly, the final article in the series included a disclaimer admitting that the paper had no further evidence that the story was real. However, the paper did state that Silvio swore the whole thing was true, and as everyone in the world knows, when the great Silvio Shirley gives his word, you can take that to the bank. From there, the legend kept growing, and surprisingly found its way into some very official sources. Newspapers in the U.S. picked up the story later in 1948, and by 1952 it even appeared in an official Coast Guard bulletin called The Proceedings of the Merchant Marine Council. Further, a declassified CIA document references the event later in the 1950s, though doesn't comment on the veracity of what actually happened. A few books and magazines on unsolved mysteries reprinted the tale over the years and expanded upon it. And of course, here we are in the age of YouTube and TikTok and podcasts, where the story has been repeated uncritically countless times. With no hard evidence to go on, most now lean toward the simplest explanation. The Orang Medan is likely nothing more than a sea story. The tale has all the hallmarks of an urban legend, plenty of dramatic flourish that make you want to retell it, but zero documentation whatsoever. Despite exhaustive searches, no crew manifests, ownership records, or legitimate registrations for this ship have ever been found. Simply put, while the secondary sources are there, the primary evidence that should also exist doesn't exist, at least not officially. No family members ever came forward claiming their loved ones were lost on a ship called the Orang Medan. These gaps make it highly likely that no such vessel ever sailed under that name, and that the story was probably a fabrication. Still, some believe that it may be a gross exaggeration of a real but less sensational event that did indeed happen in 1940. However, as of yet, no one has been able to conclusively tie the case to any real incident, despite extensive investigations. On November 9, 2008, a ghost ship called the Tai Ching 21 was found drifting near the remote Pacific island of Kiribati. The 50-ton boat was partly burned but still afloat, and eerily empty of its 29 crew members, with no distress call ever having been received. On that fateful November day, another fishing boat, crewed by South Korean fishermen, spotted the Tai Ching drifting listlessly. As they drew closer, they realized something was terribly wrong. The Tai Ching 21's exterior was blackened by a recent fire, and silence hung over the vessel. When rescuers finally boarded the ship, the scene was like a nightmare frozen in time. The decks were empty, personal belongings lay abandoned, and every single crew member was missing. Even the ship's lifeboat and 3 life rafts were gone, indicating the crew had likely evacuated in a hurry. The ship's logs, tools, and even food supplies were still in place, as if the crew had simply stepped off into the sea and disappeared. It was as if the Tai Ching 21 had become a modern-day Mary Celeste, a ghost ship drifting with no living soul in sight. Perhaps the most chilling aspect of this case is that nothing seemed amiss in the hours before the crew vanished. The last known communication from Tai Ching 21 was on October 28, 2008, almost 2 weeks before the empty boat was found. In the pre-dawn hours of that day, the Tai Ching 21's captain made a routine satellite phone call to his wife back in Taiwan. He gave no hint of any trouble. It was just a normal check-in from sea. Around the same time, the captain also radioed a nearby sister fishing vessel and arranged to meet in a couple of hours. But when the rendezvous time came around 4 that morning, the Tai Ching never showed up. It had gone radio silent and disappeared into the vast Pacific darkness. The weather in that area was reported as calm on the night of October 28th. There were no distress signals, no Mayday messages. There was absolutely nothing to indicate that anything had gone wrong that night. It was as if whatever befell the Tai Ching 21 occurred so swiftly or stealthily that the crew had no chance to call for help. The only clues would surface later when the empty vessel was found. Signs of a fire on board and the absence of all lifeboats. Once the burnt-out ghost ship was discovered on November 9th, authorities launched an urgent search and rescue mission, clinging to hope that the crew might be adrift on life rafts. The Tai Ching 21's crew consisted of 29 men, the Taiwanese captain, and 28 hired fishermen from China, the Philippines, and Indonesia. The idea that all of them could simply vanish was unthinkable, so international efforts quickly mobilized. Fiji's Rescue Coordination Center took charge, since the mystery was unfolding in their region of the Pacific. They enlisted help from the United States and New Zealand Air Forces, which deployed long-range aircraft to scour the ocean. For days, they flew search and rescue missions over the waves, scanning 21,000 square miles of open ocean north of Fiji in hopes of spotting life rafts or survivors. Naval vessels and fishing boats in the area also kept watch. Officials even dispatched teams to uninhabited atolls and sparsely populated islands north of Kiribati to see if any castaways had come ashore. But as the days turned into weeks, that hope dwindled, and search aircraft found no trace of the Tai Ching 21's crew or their life rafts. By late November 2008, after intensive efforts, rescue teams had to face the grim reality. If the 29 fishermen were adrift out there, they likely wouldn't be found, and if they were, they wouldn't be alive. Given the lack of answers, there's a wide variety of theories about what caused the fire and also what happened to the crew. And surprisingly, even without getting into weird paranormal stuff, some of the potential explanations are highly disturbing. The most straightforward theory is that a sudden onboard emergency forced the crew to abandon ship, after which they tragically perished at sea. The fire damage on the Tai Ching 21 supports this scenario. Perhaps an accidental fire in the engine room or galley broke out in the early hours of October 28th. The crew might have fought the flames until they were overwhelmed, then launched the lifeboat and rafts as a last resort. In the chaos, they may not have had time to radio for help, or the fire could have knocked out communications swiftly. Once adrift on the open Pacific, without a working radio or locator beacon, the crew could have succumbed to exposure or drowned if their rafts capsized. The Pacific Ocean is vast and unforgiving, and drifting survivors can easily vanish among the swells. The official investigations lean toward this explanation, essentially concluding that the crew abandoned a burning ship, but were never found despite the extensive search. It's a grim but plausible narrative, a desperate fight for survival that ended with the ocean claiming 29 lives. Another theory suggests that piracy or poaching was involved. Early on, Taiwanese and Fijian authorities expressed fears that the crew might have been taken by force. The logic was that the weather was calm and no distress call came, so something or someone might have prevented the crew from calling for help. A pirate attack could explain a quick, silent takeover. The pirates might have boarded the vessel at night, forced the crew off into the lifeboats, and then set the ship on fire either deliberately or through a struggle. There's precedent for violent encounters in the high seas fishing industry. Rival fishing boats or poachers have been known to clash over lucrative fishing grounds. If pirates were involved, they could have slain or kidnapped the crew, leaving the Tai Ching 21 as a smoking derelict. This theory is now largely considered debunked, since absolutely no evidence was found for this during the forensic investigation in Taiwan. In the absence of external enemies, some have looked inward at the crew dynamics themselves. The Tai Ching's crew was multicultural and far from home, with one Taiwanese captain leading 28 foreign deckhands on a long and grueling fishing voyage. The harsh reality of high seas fishing can breed desperation. This theory suggests that the crew may have mutinied, slain the captain, and then set the ship ablaze. While this theory may sound far out in the 21st century, it actually happened on Taiwanese ships in 2002 and 2003. That said, in those cases the sailors were near friendly territory, not in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, where taking a lifeboat would be extremely perilous. At present, the most likely theory is that the men had to flee rapidly due to the outbreak of a fire and weren't able to send a distress signal. However, the only thing that can be said for certain is that the 29 men who were out to provide for themselves and their families simply vanished from the face of the earth. On December 5, 1872, the crew of the British brig Dei Gratia spotted an unguided ship drifting about 400 miles west of Portugal's Azores Islands. As they drew closer, they were astonished to recognize the vessel as the Mary Celeste, a merchant brigantine that had left New York City for Europe but never arrived. Captain David Morehouse knew the Mary Celeste had departed New York 8 days ahead of his own ship, making it baffling that she had not yet reached any port. When a boarding party from the Dei Gratia climbed aboard, they found an eerie scene. The Mary Celeste was completely deserted, yet still seaworthy and intact. The crew's personal belongings were undisturbed, and a 6-month supply of food and water remained neatly stored. The ship's charts and papers were scattered about below decks, as if the crew had left in a hurry. The cargo of almost 2,000 barrels of industrial alcohol was untouched, aside from a few barrels that were mysteriously empty. However, the ship's only lifeboat was gone, and one of the pumps had been disassembled on deck. About 3.5 feet of water sloshed in the hold, a worrisome but not catastrophic amount. There were no signs of violence or fire. The 10 people who had embarked on the Mary Celeste, Captain Benjamin S. Briggs, his wife and young daughter, and 7 crewmen, had vanished without a trace. The Mary Celeste was a sturdy 2-masted merchant ship, originally launched in 1861 under the name Amazon, before coming under American ownership and Captain Briggs's command. In early November 1872, Briggs set sail from New York Harbor, bound for Genoa in Italy, carrying a hold full of denatured alcohol. The Atlantic crossing was difficult, and the ship battled heavy weather en route. According to the last log entry, dated November 25, 1872, the Mary Celeste had reached a point just shy of the Azores. That entry gave no hint of anything amiss, yet sometime between that date and December 5th, The crew apparently abandoned ship. When the Dei Gratia encountered the vessel, her sails were ragged, and some lines were dangling loosely, suggesting she had been adrift and unattended for several days. The crew of the ship brought the Mary Celeste to Gibraltar, where British authorities held an inquiry into the baffling incident. Investigators found no evidence of mutiny, piracy, or foul play that could solve the riddle. The inspector leading the investigation suspected some sort of foul play, but after months of examination, he could prove nothing amiss. The court later even entertained wild possibilities. One was that perhaps the crews of the Dei Gratia and the Mary Celeste had somehow engineered the incident as part of a fraud scheme, but nothing came of these suspicions. In the end, the salvagers received only a modest reward, and the mystery remained unsolved. Reports of the ghost ship Mary Celeste quickly spread, capturing public fascination with the idea of a perfectly fine modern vessel found inexplicably empty on the high seas. In the absence of an official explanation, a slew of theories emerged to fill the void, and early speculation focused on the specter of foul play. One of the most lurid ideas was the suggestion that perhaps pirates had attacked the Mary Celeste and slain everyone on board, leaving her adrift. This was a narrative that could send newspapers flying off the shelves, but it didn't hold up under any meaningful scrutiny. This idea didn't fit well with the facts. Piracy in those waters was rare, and the ship's cargo and valuables were still intact. The final raids by the Barbary pirates of North Africa had taken place over 40 years prior to the Mary Celeste, and in essence, the waters were essentially absolutely pirate-free. Further, these waters were heavily trafficked by both civilian and military vessels, so one-off instances of piracy were extremely unlikely. Another rumor blamed a mutiny or drunken rage, the crew supposedly tapping into the alcohol cargo and turning on the captain. But this too was implausible. The alcohol was industrial, and the crew were experienced, trustworthy men, not likely to mutiny without cause. Further, they weren't exactly in bad conditions, and were well compensated. Simply put, none of the traditional elements that could foment a mutiny on board a ship were present. With human treachery seeming extremely unlikely, people looked to more extraordinary events. Some speculated that a disastrous natural incident could have forced the crew to flee. For instance, some suggested an underwater seaquake might have violently shaken and stirred the ship. Others suggested a sudden waterspout could have been responsible. Still others suggested that a rogue wave could have slammed the vessel with water. Notably, while rogue waves are a scientific fact now, prior to the first measured rogue wave in 1995, they were considered nautical folklore. Suggesting a rogue wave in the 19th century was nearly on the level of suggesting that a ghost did it, in terms of scientific credibility. Others pointed to the volatile cargo itself. Perhaps alcohol fumes built up and led the crew to fear an imminent explosion. Notably, 9 of the barrels were found empty, and those were made of red oak, a wood more prone to leaking alcohol vapors. It's conceivable that Captain Briggs, smelling fumes or hearing alarming noises from the hold, ordered everyone into the lifeboat as a precaution in case of a blast. Beyond these scenarios, even wilder ideas took root in the imagination. Some claimed attacks by giant sea monsters were responsible, and later stories have claimed alien abductions to explain the disappearance. In fact, I found a picture of a book released in 1981 that has the Mary Celeste being hit with a water spout and a giant tentacle while traveling in the Bermuda Triangle. It also looks as though it may have been struck by a rogue wave, and it's also watched over by an alien. Modern investigations have steered toward a more straightforward explanation that doesn't require sea monsters or aliens or any form of intrigue. The leading theory today is that Captain Briggs abandoned ship in a desperate but honest attempt to save lives after misreading a situation that wasn't actually fatal. Several pieces of evidence point to this scenario. The ship's sounding rod, for measuring water in the bilge, was found on deck, as if left out after a frantic check of the hold's water level. One of the pumps was discovered broken and inoperative, suggesting the crew may have struggled to remove water from the hull. The Mary Celeste had undergone a major refit not long before, and it's believed debris or coal dust from an earlier cargo might have clogged the pump system. Thus, although there were only about 3 feet of water in the hold when found, Briggs may have had no way to gauge the situation accurately and feared his ship was flooding uncontrollably. Some researchers also theorized that the ship's chronometer was faulty, making Briggs think they were closer to land than they really were. And for those who didn't know, like myself, a chronometer is a precise marine timepiece used to determine longitude at sea. By comparing Greenwich Mean Time to local time, navigators calculate their east-west position accurately. We know the ship was, in fact, nearing Santa Maria Island in the Azores on November 25th. If Briggs expected to see land earlier and didn't, he might have worried that they were off course or in escalating danger. All these factors combined, rough seas, a possibly explosive cargo, a malfunctioning pump, and uncertainty about their position, could have driven Briggs to a dire decision. He may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat, hoping to temporarily evacuate until whatever threat was facing the ship passed. Tragically, once off the Mary Celeste, the crew never made it to safety. Perhaps the tow line to the lifeboat snapped, or a wave swamped the small boat, leaving the people stranded at sea while their ship, relieved of its human cargo, carried on without them. This scenario, while unconfirmed, fits the best available evidence and has become the most widely accepted explanation. It casts the incident not as a violent crime or supernatural event, but as a tragic misjudgment. By all accounts, Briggs was a capable and cautious captain. He would not abandon his ship unless he truly thought she was doomed. In this case, he seemingly acted to preserve lives, only for that action to doom everyone in the lifeboat. Despite countless attempts to unravel it, the fate of the Mary Celeste's crew remains an open question. No final log entries or purported survivor stories have ever surfaced to provide closure. Interestingly, the Mary Celeste itself survived its infamous voyage and sailed under new owners for another dozen years. Unfortunately, this wouldn't be the last time the Mary Celeste would dominate the headlines for all the wrong reasons. In 1885, the ship met a questionable end when a disgruntled captain deliberately ran it aground on a reef in Haiti in an attempted insurance fraud. The scheme failed, and the battered ship was abandoned to rot in Haiti. This subsequent event again made people look at the owners of the ship and consider the potential for insurance fraud the first time around, but nothing came of it once again. The Mary Celeste is a story that has been retold and embellished for over 150 years, yet it never seems to lose its grip on our imagination. Personally, I'm a big lover of maritime mysteries, and this is one I would love to see solved one day, even though I know it'll never be definitively cracked.